I would like to share with you this evening the story of that one time I went stand-up paddleboarding in a country that doesn't even exist. But before I start my story, can I ask you a question? If you get shot, do you hear the sound of the bullet before it hits the back of your head, or do you just get hit in blissful ignorance? That's the question that was running through my mind when I went stand-up paddleboarding in Eastern Europe in September 2018. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. Perhaps I should explain that I'm on a mission to go stand-up paddleboarding in every country in the world. And as I sit here this evening, I'm on country number 45. And it was during my research for some stand-up paddleboarding trips in 2018 that I came across a place which you've probably never heard of, a place called Transnistria. And Transnistria actually sits in a little slither of land which is in between Moldova and Ukraine. And as soon as I read about this place on the internet, I was absolutely fascinated. It's a country, if indeed it is a country, which came into being in 1992 when there was a very brief civil war there. This is a country, it has its own police force, it has its own border patrol, it has its own customs, it has its own currency, it has its own flag. I'll show you the flag now. It's the only flag left in the world. It still has the hammer and sickle on it. But no other country in the world recognises Transnistria. And that's probably why you've never heard about it. And when I did a bit more research, I found out that the two largest cities in Transnistria, a place called Tiraspol and a place called Pendiri, they're actually connected by a river. So as a stand-up paddleboarder, that was just absolutely perfect for me. I just knew that I had to visit this fascinating place. It wasn't so easy to get to. Obviously, as a country that doesn't exist, there are no international airports there. So I had to fly in through Romania and Moldova. So I flew into Bucharest. And part of the most exciting part of this trip was actually getting from Romania to Moldova. I treated myself at the princely sum of 30 euros. I treated myself to a single berth in a two-berth sleeper compartment on a 12-hour train journey from Bucharest to Chisinau. And this is the actual train I got. This train's about 50 or 60 years old. It's an old Soviet Union era sleeper train. And it's the same train that's been there, since whenever, basically. This was my sleeper compartment. This was the second compartment on the train. And I know it's a bit of a cliche when people say that they felt the hand of history on their shoulder, but I really felt the history of sitting in this train. I imagined what sort of senior Soviet Politburo members and political people would have travelled in that particular compartment. It was the second one on the train. I guess the president of the country was probably in compartment number one, and somebody very important would have travelled in this compartment as well. I was absolutely fascinated travelling through the countryside. When we got to the border between Romania and Moldova, some fascinating things happened. First of all, the border patrol people came on and checked everyone's passports. That happened twice, once for each country. And customs also came round and checked my baggage, which it took them a while to have a good look through my stand-up paddleboarding equipment. And most fascinating of all, every single carriage on the train was lifted up off the tracks, and the wheels were replaced because there's a different gauge of railway in Moldova than there is in Romania. And the gauge of railway was changed just after the Second World War, when Moldova came under the control of Russia and the Soviet Union. And people say it was part of Stalin's paranoia that Russia might be invaded by train. I've no idea, but absolutely fascinating story. And as I was hurtling through Eastern Europe in this old Soviet-era sleeper train, I must admit, I felt a little bit like James Bond. I don't know if you recall those James Bond films where 007's in a sleeper train travelling through some strange part of the world. There were only two differences between me and James Bond. Number one, a trained assassin from Spectre didn't jump out and try and kill me. And I was slightly relieved about that, to be honest. And the second difference was that I didn't get to make love to Miss World. I wasn't quite as relieved about that, but I don't mind admitting that's not the only day in my life that I didn't get to make love to Miss World. So that fascinating journey to Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. When I got there, I had a very quick paddle on Gigidici Reservoir. All I'll say is it was a very, very wet and very, very windy day. I was actually glad to get off the water there. And the following day, I made my way into the breakaway country of Transnistria. And it really is a relic of the Soviet era, that country. There are big monuments to Yuri Gagarin and to Lenin, and big tanks celebrating the end of the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War, as the Russians call it. And it's kind of, although it's not a communist country, they still love Russia. Russia's the motherland. And I was warned before I went there that it's actually against the law to take a photograph of the government building and the statue of Lenin that sits in front of the government building. I was warned if you get caught doing that, you could be arrested by the KGB. So here's the photograph I took. Please, if you ever visit that country, don't tell anyone that I did this. The following day, it was time for me to do that epic trip from Bendiri to Tiraspol on my stand-up paddleboard down the river Dniester. By the way, if there's any native Russian speakers here this evening, I hope you'll forgive me for mangling your language. After all the excitement of travelling into Transnistria and going in the old Soviet-era train and feeling like James Bond and being nervous as I crossed the border and passed the Russian army, the actual stand-up paddleboarding trip itself was almost a little bit like an anticlimax. I got on the water here at this grassy verge in Bendiri. I stopped here for lunch about 2/3 of the way down my trip, and just look how calm the water is there. If you're a stand-up paddleboarder or a paddler of any description, I think you'll recognise those are absolutely perfect paddling conditions. And I made my way down to Tiraspol. I got off the water here at this tiny city beach in Tiraspol. It felt like a bit of an anticlimax, to be honest. It was about a 15-mile paddle. It took me about 3.5 hours paddling time, plus that half hour for lunch. And it was an anticlimax, apart from one disturbing incident right after I started off at Bendiri. And if there's anyone listening who paddles or sails or travels on rivers, you'll know that we travel on the right-hand side of the river. So just after I set off at Bendiri, I was paddling on the right, and I came across this, I could only describe it as an old rusted metal ship that was moored on the right-hand side of the river. It was completely covered in brown rust, and it looked completely deserted. And just as I was paddling past, I moved out to overtake it. And at that point, an armed Russian soldier appeared on the deck as if from nowhere and began frantically gesturing at me to get away from this boat. And I just kept paddling as furiously as I possibly could. And I could just hear him shouting behind me in Russian. Now, fortunately, I don't speak Russian, so I had no idea what he was saying. I don't know about you, I always think Russian sounds like quite an aggressive language. Maybe the soldier was just shouting, "Have a nice day," and it sounded aggressive to me. Perhaps he was saying, "Come back or I'll shoot you." I've got no idea. But I thought the best thing to do is just continue paddling. I had that thought in my mind. If I get shot here, will I know anything about it or not? Fortunately, I've lived to tell the tale. And perhaps as I continue my journey to go stand-up paddleboarding in other countries throughout the world, perhaps I should brush up on my language skills. It was certainly one of the most interesting and one of the most scary experiences I had. But I think just visiting that fascinating country, it's encouraged me to push the boat out a little bit, to look for other opportunities to travel to interesting and unusual places, and to say yes to new opportunities.